This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Like a lot of millennials who came of age during the George W. Bush presidency, there's one thing I just know to be true about the Lone Star State.
Don't mess with Texas.
Just for the record, I am not messing with Texas, but I'm starting to feel like maybe this is a one-sided relationship because I'm getting the sense that Texas has no problems messing with everyone else.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of have PTSD from that phrase as well, because I've covered a lot of messes in Texas over the years, and what's happening now is the latest iteration of that.
That's Ari Berman from Mother Jones. If you ask me, Ari is the voting rights expert. If there's anything happening that impacts our relationship to our elected representatives, Ari's reporting is the easiest way to figure out what's going on. So when I saw news that dozens of Democratic state lawmakers were fleeing Texas, seeking refuge in places like Illinois and New York, I knew we needed Ari to bring us up to speed.
They left the state to prevent Republicans in the legislature from passing a new redistricting map that would give Republicans up to 5 new U.S. House seats.
Gerrymandering is old news. It's when state lawmakers draw their congressional districts to group specific voters together. Done successfully, the party in power can score way more seats in Congress than they would otherwise. The reason we're talking about this now is because states typically redraw their congressional maps every 10 years, and Texas, just like everyone else, had their maps certified in 2021. But because the U.S. House of Representatives is so evenly divided, national Republicans are trying to get states to do whatever it takes to hold on to their threadbare majority in the 2026 midterm elections.
This kind of mid-decade redistricting is extremely unusual. So Democrats really had no choice. The only way they were going to be able to block this, at least temporarily, was to leave the state and prevent Republicans from having a quorum in the legislature.
No quorum means the state house can't gavel in, means, for now anyway, these new maps are on hold. But there's no obvious means to stop Texas from eventually getting their way. And if that happens, don't expect it to end there. It, in many ways, feels like the tip of the iceberg because other states, both Democrat and Republican, are threatening to get involved in different ways. The national parties are also pushing their agendas. How is this bigger than just Texas?
I mean, this could be the beginning of a redistricting arms race. What's happening now is if Texas goes first, then California is threatening to retaliate, and other blue states may retaliate, and then red states are going to retaliate in response to that retaliation. Ohio, Florida, Missouri. And the question is kind of where does it end? There's already a lot of gerrymandering in different states. There's already very few competitive elections for the U.S. House. And what's going to happen is states are going to become even more gerrymandered, blue and red states alike. And that's going to lead to more preordained election outcomes, fewer competitive races, fewer ways to hold politicians accountable. And I think it's going to lead to even more distrust in the political system by the public, who already is very low on trust in political institutions right now altogether.
Today on the show, is the only way to win the House to cheat? I'm Rob Gunther, filling in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
With Robinhood, not only can you trade individual stocks and ETFs, you can also seamlessly buy and sell crypto at low costs. Trade all in one place. Get started now on Robinhood. Trading crypto involves significant risk. Crypto trading is offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services. Crypto held through Robinhood Crypto is not FDIC insured or SIPC protected. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal. Securities trading is offered through an account with Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, a registered broker-dealer.
This episode is brought to you by Quince. With summer winding down, refreshing your wardrobe with staple pieces for the season ahead might be on your mind. I know it's on my mind because I always like a new scarf, a new shirt, new pair of pants going into the fall. It's like that back-to-school shopping thing. It's just baked into my brain. Quince sent me a couple other pieces to try on, see how I liked them. Right now, I'm wearing their linen pants, which I really love because they can be a little bit fancy if I add a button-down top or some jewelry, or they can be super casual if I'm wearing a t-shirt like I am right now. Just really flexible stuff that I wear again and again. And now that the season might be getting a little colder, you can check out their cashmere and cotton sweaters that start at just $40. They've also got washable silk tops, classic denim pants, all the stuff you need for the fall season. The best part is that everything at Quince is half the cost of similar brands. They work directly with factories to give you luxury without the markup. So go ahead. Elevate your fall wardrobe essentials with Quince. Go to quince.com/whatnext for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/whatnext to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/whatnext.
I'm Nate Silver.
And I'm Maria Konnikova. We're journalists who moonlight as high-stakes poker players. And on our podcast, Risky Business, we bring an analytical lens, thinking about odds, incentives, and outcomes to the choices shaping our democracy.
Because every move in politics is a calculation, and sometimes our leaders can make bad bets.
You don't say, Nate. If you want to understand what our politicians are thinking and what's at stake with each decision they make, this show is for you.
Listen to Risky Business wherever you get your podcasts.
Ari, how does redistricting usually work?
Redistricting usually happens once a decade after the census comes out. So typically the census is done every 10 years. The last one happened in 2020, and then redistricting happens shortly thereafter, usually the year after. And so for it to happen mid-decade is extremely unusual, absent some kind of court order or change to a map that's necessitated for some reason or another. Just redrawing the maps because you feel like it generally doesn't happen mid-decade.
So it's very rare to do this, but notably Texas has been here before, not too long ago. Tell me what happened in 2003.
Yeah, Texas did it in 2003. That was, again, something that really came from Washington. It came from House Majority Leader Tom DeLay, who was really a larger-than-life figure in Congress who was from Texas. And basically what happened is Texas had been shifting from Democratic to Republican, and Democrats had drawn pretty aggressive gerrymanders of their own in the 1990s, and then a court had drawn new districts for the 2000 cycle. And then Republicans got control of the legislature, so they were in a position to redraw Texas's districts at a time that the state was trending more red. And so Tom DeLay basically ordered this mid-decade redistricting in Texas. Democrats fled to Ardmore, Oklahoma, a pretty obscure place. They eventually had to come back. That new redistricting map passed, and it targeted a lot of vulnerable Democrats. But that really marked a turning point in terms of both mid-decade redistricting and gerrymandering writ large, because it signaled a much more aggressive era of redrawing maps in the years to come.
Yeah, it was notable to me. I was reading one of the New York Times articles about this, and it said that after 2003, Republicans got the majority of Texas's U.S. House delegation. That advantage remains to this day. So this really was a generational turning point.
It was. Democrats had a majority in the congressional delegation, and then Republicans got it. Texas has kept growing, and Republicans have been able to draw the maps in such a way to really advantage themselves that, even as Texas becomes more politically competitive, has had some close races in the past for things like U.S. Senate, the congressional delegation is pretty lopsided for Republicans. They currently control 25 of 38 congressional districts in the state. If this new map that they proposed were to pass, they would control 30 of 38 congressional districts, which is basically almost 80% of the state's congressional delegation, which is a much larger advantage than Republicans enjoy statewide, for example. And now, interestingly enough, a lot of Texas Republicans were apprehensive about pursuing this kind of redistricting in the future because they felt like there was no point. Texas already has a large majority of members in both the state legislature and the U.S. Congress who are Republican. But I think they felt like there was no way that they could say no to Donald Trump, that not just in terms of statewide, but in terms of Republican primaries, where so many elections are decided in the Texas Republican Party, Trump remains very popular.
Yeah, talk to me more about that, because I remember when this story first popped up, my understanding is that Governor Abbott, like you said, he was initially not in favor of redrawing these maps. The worry was that, they couldn't squeeze any more gerrymandering out of the maps. Do any of those concerns still exist? Is there a possibility that they could backfire?
Not really. And I think that may be one of the things that convinced Abbott and other Republicans to do this, is that they were presented with redistricting maps that showed that you actually could draw more Republican seats in Texas without endangering other Republican members. Because if you look at the map that was eventually introduced, which was clearly drawn in Washington and then sent down to Texas, 30 of 38 seats, Trump would have won by 10 points or more. And there's no seats that become more competitive that are, for example, within a few points. So the Republicans that are in Congress right now, they don't really have anything to worry about. But there's going to be more of them, and they want to remain in the majority. So I think they were convinced, number one, they couldn't stand up to Trump. They weren't going to do that. Texas Republicans were not going to be the ones to say no to Donald Trump. But also, number two, they realized that they could do this kind of gerrymandering without really any kind of backlash to their own party. Even if they don't pick up all 5 seats that they draw, let's say they only pick up 3, that's still 3 more seats than they otherwise would have had.
So there's this legal argument that's being pushed here to justify this. I'm hoping you can help me articulate it, because I think it helps clarify the stakes here beyond Texas. You point out in your reporting that the Department of Justice had sent this letter to Governor Abbott and to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. It said that this redistricting is necessary because Texas's maps, as they're currently drawn, give, quote, an unconstitutional racial gerrymander to certain groups. And they're sort of picking up the baton from this legal theory that's been percolating in the courts for several years now. Tell me about how the judiciary has framed gerrymanders in the past.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the Department of Justice claimed that these 4 districts that are all represented by Black or Hispanic Democrats were unconstitutional racial gerrymanders. And they were basically arguing that the use of race to draw these type of districts violates the Voting Rights Act, which in and of itself is a controversial assertion. Then they were also saying that specifically what's called coalition districts in which multiple different minority groups constitute a majority. So in Texas, there's a lot of districts where Blacks and Hispanics are together a combined majority, that those districts are unconstitutional. Now, Texas Republicans came out afterwards, one by one, and said, we're not doing this because of the DOJ letter. We're doing this to help Republicans. We're doing this for partisan reasons. Which was interesting in and of itself, but they were actually, I think, trying to give themselves cover, because the Supreme Court, in another opinion, basically said that the federal courts cannot police partisan gerrymandering, meaning that Texas Republicans can basically say, we just did this for political reasons. That may be distasteful to people, but what they're saying is, well, thanks to the Supreme Court, you can't actually do anything about it.
So they're saying like partisan gerrymanders are okay, but racial gerrymanders, we're trying to use the courts to squash.
Yeah, and I mean, it also depends on your definition of racial gerrymandering, right? This is where this gets complicated, because what the Department of Justice is saying is that drawing districts that lead to more representation for communities of color, that in and of itself may be unconstitutional. But civil rights groups and voting rights advocates are making the opposite argument about the Texas's map, that Texas is giving too little representation for communities of color. If you look at the last redistricting cycle, the one that happened in 2021, 95% of the population growth in Texas came from communities of color. Texas gained 2 seats in the U.S. House because of that. But when it came time to draw new districts, Texas drew those districts in areas with white majorities. So civil rights groups argued that violated the Voting Rights Act. And now if you look at the maps, the new maps that are being proposed, they would further limit representation for people of color.
So the growth in the state is being driven in large part by minorities, and yet these maps are serving to dilute that power.
Exactly. So there's all sorts of things going on here. I mean, there's an argument that civil rights groups are making about what Texas is doing. Then there's an argument that the Justice Department's making about Texas. So they're kind of like 2 different arguments. Whereas like the Department of Justice is saying Texas used race too much. And Texas Republicans are saying we didn't use race at all. And civil rights groups are saying, well, actually, maybe you should have considered race more. And it's also just really stunning, I think, to see the Justice Department intervene in this kind of way. I think that has been an underlooked part of the story. The fact that essentially the Justice Department just fabricated a justification that was used to begin this whole process in the first place, that so many Republicans in Texas have just openly disavowed. So on the one hand, they are going along with Trump's scheme, but they're also undercutting the arguments that Trump's own Justice Department is making, which I don't know how that will factor into the eventual court proceedings on this, but you have to think that it's going to be relevant somehow.
After the break, how this gerrymandering arms race is playing out around the country.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kann du Norsk?
If you used Babbel, you would. Babbel's conversation-based techniques teaches you useful words and phrases to get you speaking quickly about the things you actually talk about in the real world, with lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts and voiced by real native speakers. Babbel is like having a private tutor in your pocket. Start speaking with Babbel today. Get up to 55% off your Babbel subscription right now at babbel.com/Spotify, spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify. Rules and restrictions may apply.
It started with the biggest pipe bomb the FBI had ever seen.
There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes.
It ended in a dumpster after the largest manhunt in American history.
My knees knocked so hard that I was about to answer them. That's how nervous I was.
Eric Rudolph and the rise of anger.
Domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now.
True story, true crime, true consequences for us all.
American Shrapnel, from award-winning journalists Becca Andrews and John Archibald, 2-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Now available wherever you get your podcasts.
So gerrymandering itself, it's not strictly a Republican tool, and it's not a new one either. But I want to talk about how the parties have positioned themselves next to gerrymandering over the past 10 or 20 years. What directions have they gone in?
Well, generally speaking, Republicans have tried to maximize their numbers through redistricting and have been very aggressive about it and have been better at it and more organized about it than Democrats. Democrats have not been as willing to gerrymander as Republicans have. And there's certainly exceptions to that. There are places like Illinois where they've gerrymandered very effectively. But in other places, from New York to California to Colorado, they've given a lot of power to independent commissions to draw their districts in the name of good government. And I think a lot of Democrats are regretting that right now. And they're feeling like they unilaterally disarmed and they gave Republicans an advantage. It's also true that Republicans just control more power at the state level. So even if Democrats were to maximally gerrymander in response to Republicans maximally gerrymandering, Republicans would be able to gerrymander in more places. And when Democrats say that they're going to fight fire with fire, one party has more fire to fight with. I mean, that's just the reality here, that if Texas gerrymanders and then California gerrymanders in response, and then New York and Illinois get on it, Republicans are just going to be able to do it in more places. And I just think they're going to be more ruthless about it. So I understand why Democrats are hitting back here or vowing to hit back. And I get their argument against unilateral disarmament. But I have a very hard time seeing how they're going to win a gerrymandering arms race with the GOP.
Yeah, I mean, we saw New York State have a similar problem a few years back where they tried to institute a very partisan gerrymander, but they kind of got hamstrung by their own good governance legislation, which instituted this nonpartisan committee that you're talking about, right? And that kind of blew up spectacularly, right?
So New York Democrats actually tried to pass a more aggressive gerrymandering of the U.S. House to give them more seats, not unlike what Texas is doing now, although they tried to do it through more regular order. And it ended up being blocked by the courts. And an independent map drawer drew the maps instead and did it in such a way that was helpful for Republicans. And so I think New York Democrats were kind of skittish about trying to do this again. And there's real risks here for Democrats. I mean, Democrats are going to be in states where there are judges that are going to be more critical about gerrymandering than, for example, you'll find in Texas. I mean, I think Democrats generally believe that gerrymandering is bad for democracy. Not all Democrats believe that, and not all Republicans believe it's good for democracy. But I think the party has different views on this. And I think Democratic voters and Democratic officials have been committed to trying to ban this kind of extreme partisan gerrymandering, whereas Republicans really haven't cared that much about doing it. And so for Democrats to suddenly shift would require a lot of moving parts.
So now when we look at blue states, the focus is on New York, it's on California, it's on Illinois. What is the game plan here?
Well, the game plan is to try to do it in as many states as possible. Starting with California, it's more complicated, though, because California is one of those states that has an independent commission. So what they're proposing in California, what the Governor Newsom is proposing in California, is to have the legislature draw new maps. And that would essentially give Democrats more representation, put it to the voters to approve so that it doesn't violate the independent commission, and then say this is only going to be done until 2030 when the commission will draw new lines. But they have to convince the voters to say yes to this. And that may be difficult because the voters themselves approved this kind of check on partisan gerrymandering in the first place. So it's not impossible, but again, it's not like in Texas, they can just step up and redraw the districts with very little checks. In other blue states, there are impediments that exist that don't exist in Texas. So it doesn't mean that Democrats aren't going to try. It doesn't mean that Democrats aren't going to be able to pick up seats in response to this. But if you look at the numbers, Republicans have more places they can gerrymander than Democrats do. So we could have a dozen states redraw maps in advance of the 2026 midterms, and Republicans could still come out with an advantage heading into the next election.
And then if you look at the Republican states beyond just Texas, we're seeing a lot of activity other places. Where are you looking in particular?
Well, first, Ohio, because of a quirk in their own state law, they actually have to redraw their districts because they passed these very gerrymandered maps that didn't have bipartisan support. And under the state constitution, they have to then redo them. Now, the unfortunate part of that is they have to redo them because they were so gerrymandered, but then now they're going to draw an even more aggressive gerrymandering. So it doesn't really seem like that the constraints on gerrymandering have worked out so well in Ohio, but Ohio's going to do it. The other states that they're talking about, one is Florida. There's talk about doing it in Missouri, in Indiana, New Hampshire. I mean, there's a lot of places where they're talking about doing it. When you're talking about potentially they could pick up 10 new seats as a result of this process.
It strikes me, though, that even though these proposals might seem fantastic, unrealistic, unconstitutional, just the fact that they're being talked about, I feel like it pushes the center of the conversation way to the right. I think a good piece of evidence for this is a guy like former Obama Attorney General Eric Holder. His whole deal since he left the White House was this quest to make redistricting nonpartisan. And he had a lot of success in his efforts. And even Eric Holder now, after Texas announced its redistricting, he's like, you know what? Screw this. We got to fight fire with fire. I mean, how deep are we racing to the bottom here?
Well, I think that's what Trump does, is Trump just normalizes all sorts of attacks on democracy and every front, and forces you often to get in the gutter with him. I mean, why are Democrats suddenly embracing potential conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein, right? I mean, that was something they would have absolutely mocked a few years ago. And now they're all in on it because they see this as, an opportunity to hurt Donald Trump. And so, I mean, I think that Democrats and good government advocates are being really put in an unenviable position, because if they continue to adopt independent commissions in blue states, but red states continue to do extreme gerrymandering, that's just going to make the political process even more unfair, even more skewed. So I think the argument could be that, yes, we need to stop unilateral disarmament, but at the end of the day, we have to work towards a solution that would eventually police this kind of behavior. But in the meantime, we have no choice but to embrace it. So I think that Democrats are less than enthusiastic, most of them, about the argument that they're making and the embrace of gerrymandering that they've previously disavowed. But I feel like they think they have no choice, that ultimately the temporary, I want to think about how I say this, but the sort of temporarily undermining of democracy to pursue the larger goal of saving American democracy is a trade-off that is needed and necessary.
It's a dangerous game, though. You gotta kind of bet on the fact that the Democrats will cede power back to the people after it's all said and done, if they win.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is dangerous. I mean, first off, gerrymandering is bad no matter where it happens, and so it's going to lead to more unfair outcomes in the states that do it. It's hard to imagine that if you then pick up more seats, you're suddenly going to want to give those states back. But I think the bigger fear here is that in this race to the bottom, that Republicans are going to win. I mean, that's not to say that Democrats shouldn't do it to the extent that they can in the places that they can. But I just I have a hard time imagining how, if every state does a tit for tat redistricting mid-decade, how Republicans won't come out ahead, and how voters at the end of the day are going to be the ones that suffer the consequences in both red and blue areas.
So ultimately, Ari, when you zoom out, you have both parties fighting over like a handful of seats across the country. It seems unclear how it's going to play out, although you think Republicans are going to come out on top. And then you have the fate of Trump's presidency arguably hanging in the balance. Like, what are the last 2 years of his presidency going to look like? What do you think the next year is going to look like as we get ready for the midterms?
The Trump White House called it a maximum political warfare. And I think that is a good way to think about this, that this is going to be possibly one of the ugliest periods in American politics that we've seen in a long time, that you have a White House that is desperate to avoid accountability and doing everything they can to try to manipulate the system to achieve that. You have enablers at the state level all across the country who are eager to help the president escape this kind of accountability. And then you have the Democratic Party in a quest to retain power, basically forced to turn their back on their own stated principles. So it's hard to see how this ends in a way that ultimately benefits the voters or American democracy writ large.
Ari Berman, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Great to talk to you.
Ari Berman is a voting rights correspondent at Mother Jones. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Rob Gunther. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm at @OneRobGunther. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Mamá, papá, mi cuerpo crece a un ritmo alarmante y la ropa que me compren ahora me quedará muy pequeña muy pronto. Pero su billetera no tiene que sufrir por la moda con los precios bajos de la vuelta a clases de Amazon. Amazon, gasta menos, sonríe más.